Today I'm going to be going over this watch that I bought a few weeks ago. It's a solid gold Omega prototype that is, it looks identical to the basic or the classic iconic Swatch design. And I made a PDF about this, which there's a link to it in the description. So if you're interested in all these details, please feel free to download that and also to share it with other people who might be interested in either Omega or Swatch history. So first, I'm going to cut to some shots of the kind of opening of this and my going through it before I made the 25 slides that I'll be going through with the details of it. And the story behind this is that I saw it on Ricardo. It didn't make sense that it was both a Swatch and or an Omega. And then I saw these initials on the back of engraved in the back of the case that said GG. And because I've been kind of studying Swiss watch history for the last 6 months or so, I'm very aware of Gérald Genta's influence on design history in the watch industry. And I've even gone so far as to kind of quiz my wife when we're walking around town or whatever, and we see like a Royal Oak or a Nautilus in a shop window or whatever. I'm like, oh, who designed that? And she got so tired of me asking that eventually she said, can I just say GG instead of Gérald Genta? So when I saw the letters GG engraved in the back of this watch, it really made me curious if it could be a prototype that was made by Gérald Genta. And at this point, I think it was. And I'll outline in detail, in excruciating detail, why I think that as I go through the PDF. But the fun thing for me was that part of the reason I wanted to make this channel was to be able to explore kind of the intersection of the watch industry with the history of Switzerland. And the whole kind of creation of the Swatch as a lead product for the Swatch company, which was formed by merging these two already consolidated Swiss watch companies into one, the ASUAG and the SSIH. They were merged in 1983 by Nicholas Hayek, who was a consultant to the watch industry and other kind of industrial companies. So the banks which owned a lot of ASUAG and SSIH prior to 1983, or including 1983, they were worried about the effect of the quartz crisis on the industry and their investments in these watch holding companies. So they hired Nicholas Hayek to do an analysis, and he came up with this plan to merge ASUAG, which consisted of ETA, Autoschild, Longines, Valjoux, and Ebosch's ESA, which was another movement company, to merge that with the SSIH, which was Omega, Tissot, and Lemania, and others, I think. So in 1980, he started looking into that. And then in 1981, ETA put together this plan for a inexpensive plastic watch, which would become the Swatch. And it started kind of testing it, design testing, et cetera. By the end of 1982, they did a test in Texas in the United States of, I think, 10,000 prototype watches. And it didn't go that well, but they learned something from it. And then they finally released it in Switzerland in 1983. And by the time they released it in Switzerland, they kind of finished doing some fun designs. Like the Texas design, I think, was kind of boring. But by 1983 and the official launch, they had kind of completed the designs, and they had these fun designs made by Schmidt and Muller, and the whole concept of the Swatch and kind of incorporating the influence of artists in the dials and straps, and then eventually in cases and everything else. that was there from the beginning as a result of the influence of Schmidt and Muller. So now the interesting thing about this, when I saw the watch in the Ricardo listing, because I had been reading a lot of this history, not so much about Swatch, but about ETA and the merger between, let's say, ETA holding company and Omega holding company, because it gets boring to keep saying ASUAG and SSIH. So the kind of the ETA side of it and the Omega side of it, because I've been reading about that, I knew that the Swatch was on the ETA side of the family tree, and Omega was on the other side of the family tree, and that the merger didn't happen until after the Swatch had been launched. Officially, it didn't happen. So the watch made me curious about how it could be that it was already that an Omega design might have been used in the Swatch. And so that's why I bought it, and then I took it apart and came up with all this information about it. So this is the, let me go full screen on this. So now I'm going to start going through the PDF. There's a cover page on here with a link back to my YouTube channel. And then these are just some shots I did of the watch. Basically, my first analysis was that it's monocoque, which is like a mono hull or a single hull, shrouded lug. That means that the lugs are covered by the top case of the watch, and it has the monocoque shrouded lug with those two support bridges between the lugs. That also is a verbal description of the Swatch, but as you can see, it also looks like a Swatch. So the thing that was interesting about it is that the listing said that it had an Omega movement in it, and it ended up having an Omega reference number in it too, reference 135017 SP. And then it also had this unique hallmark on the back, and the hallmark was also on the 18 karat gold buckle. So in this slide, you can see the hallmark is this crab hallmark here, which is stamped in the back down in this area. And it also has the letters GG engraved with a pantograph. And the reason that I know that's a pantograph is because I've looked at these things under the microscope before, and you can see the engravers, that is slightly different shape of the two Gs, basically. And also the path of the engraving tool is kind of uneven. So that's not a stamp, that's an engraving. And then the reference number is engraved in the case. And this case, when we compare it with a Omega Seamaster Cosmic from 1969, the case internals are exactly the same. And because this is a monocoque case, there's a special, the movement, the Omega 601 movement that was in it requires a split stem, which you can pull apart so that you can pull the movement out of the front. Because people that know watches know, the stem release button on an Omega movement and most movements is on the back. So normally you would open the case back and release the stem, pull the stem out, and then pull the case out the back. Because the case comes out the front and you can't get in the back to even push that button, you need to have a split stem that you can remove so the stem doesn't obstruct you from pulling the case out the front. And by split stem, it means it literally breaks in half, or not breaks, but snaps apart and then snaps back together. And then the other thing is, after that, the movement is lodged in a way where the case clamps, they slip into these two slots, and then you rotate it to lock the movement in the case, and you rotate it back to pull it out. And this whole design, internal design, is identical to the Omega 13517 SP internal design, including these slots for the case clamps. And you'll see that in this next, well, maybe not this slide, but you'll see it Actually, I don't even have a picture of this. If you look up the 135017 SP or any of these monocoque Seamaster cases, you'll see that. But so moving on. Sorry, I just want to interject one other thing here, which is the other thing that's interesting about this for me and rewarding is that, as people have been following the channel know, I've been learning watchmaking kind of from this perspective of being able to better understand history. And I think that this find is really special because it demonstrates how, if you want to understand watch history, it's important to have the basic watchmaking skills to be able to safely take a watch apart, a watch like this apart, and to understand what's inside. And the way that you gain that understanding is by examining a lot of other watches. So these are the internals for an Omega Seamaster Cosmic. This is the dial, and this is one that I purchased, but the pictures are from the original listing because I just purchased it recently. But the pictures were enough for me to see that it was a Singer dial, the Singer signature is here, and that if you look back at the first pictures of this, of the what I call the GG, it has these weird kind of single point indices, rows of 3 indices, and they're not even evenly spaced. And when I saw that in the original listing, I was also very suspicious and curious about why that was. So it appears that what happened was the watchmaker or the case maker used a Singer blank, designed for an Omega Seamaster Cosmic, and then it hadn't had the indices applied yet. So the holes for the indices were already pre-drilled in it. And then to make it look kind of normal, they wanted probably to mark the, I'm not sure why actually, but on the Singer dial, there were 3 holes drilled at one position and 2 at the other positions. And this is true of all of these Singer dials of that period with the 4 indices, elements or whatever you call it. They had 3 drilled and with 1 drilled with 3 points and 3 drilled with 2 points. But because this one is drilled unevenly, that resulted in this uneven placement of this indice, of the dots on this indice. So anyway, the watchmaker, case designer, whoever put this together, wanted to make it non-Omega, or wanted to use the blank in a creative way. So they drilled additional holes in these 3 points, and then they applied those indices. Or that's my analysis anyway. So the pin buckle, which is also 18 karat gold, also has this crab stamp on it, and then 750 gold stamp, and there's a free ring for the strap, end of the strap, which also is 750 gold. This kind of looks like it's worn through and it's gold plated, but that's just a green light reflected in my office, so it is solid gold. You can see the same green light reflected in the strap over here. So then, opening it up, I found inside a Cal 601. This is the dial side. This is the back side. On the back side, there's a serial number, and Omega movements can be dated by their serial numbers pretty accurately. So I dated that, and it was from 1969. And then you can also see the problem with the stem release that I was talking about. This button right here is the stem release button, and it's on the case, or it's on the back side of the movement. So that's why, that's why you need to have that split stem arrangement. And in here you can see this is the remaining part of the split stem. It has a kind of cylindrical element on the end that is grasped by the other half of it. So then the dial, this is a close-up of the dial with those indices and their uneven placement. And then this is the back of the actual dial. And like the 1969 Seamaster Cosmic, it is badged or signed by Singer. It looks basically identical to that one. And you can see how those extra holes were drilled for the extra index dots. So the other thing I looked at is of course, the crown. It was also signed by Omega, and all of these other parts conformed to me from what I've experienced in terms of looking at 1960s parts, and the screw bar. It uses a screw bar rather than a spring bar, and the screw bar is a split screw bar, so it screws in on both sides and meets in the middle. There's two elements to each side of the watch, and those I just said they were from 1969 because they were custom for the case. So then the next design reference I have is the 1972 Omega Seamaster Cosmic 2000, which I feel like it has the kind of a similar design DNA to the prototype, but it's gone to an integrated bracelet, and then it has this interesting kind of the bezel actually is a movement holder, and the entire bezel and movement holder slips out of this support ring, and it has a snapback, so it diverges from the monocoque design, and it doesn't require the split stem, and it's basically a different design, but I feel like it has echoes of that prototype. And then the next design reference is the 1982 Swatch GT100, which is the one that they released in the test market in Texas in late 1982. And you can see it already had the two extra lug bridges, and is very similar to the GG watch. And then this is a limited edition 1993 Trésor Magique watch, which was made in platinum, and it looks virtually identical to the GG. And there's a comparison on the next slide. But in particular, if you look at the buckle, and the buckle and obviously the case, so the buckles are identical down to the tang, or the whatever that thing's called. And the only difference is the Trésor Magique doesn't have a metal free ring, it has a leather free ring. And also, of course, the case back, it has a transparent case back, and not the monocoque design. But the bodies of the watches look the same. The buckles look the same to an uncanny extent. Like I pretty much would not. Nobody could convince me that that's an accident. Somebody knew that this 1969 case was being used in this design. And I think they probably knew it as early as 1981 because of the design evolution within the Swatch Group itself, or what became the Swatch Group, but what was ETA at that time. And again, ETA was on the opposite side of the family tree as Omega. So that indicates that there was some kind of cross-communication, which is not surprising because Nicholas Hayek was already coordinating the merger starting in 1980. So Marlies Schmidt and Bernard Mueller are basically, they're credited for the case design by historians, but they're not necessarily, I haven't found any evidence that Swatch credits them with the case design. And case designs are evolutionary, and they have multiple inputs into them. So like this is from a website called Swatch Prototypes, and the website states that Schmidt and Mueller designed the final version of the casing, the shape, and the two additional bridges for stabilizing the mount of the strap, which is one of the main characteristics of Swatch watches. But that doesn't mean that that's true. It's just this person's impression of it. What is true is that in a lot of the auctions of like this, the Schmidt-Mueller collection and other Swatch collections, which used graphics from the time as part of the graphics of the sales, they did show a lot of these graphics and designs from that period, and I could see how that would lead somebody to conclude that Schmidt and Mueller actually designed it from scratch. But as we'll see, there's no reason why that is necessarily true. The reason somebody might come to that conclusion is because this has their names on it, it has that design, and there's some evolution behind this that is also relevant. And that that evolutionary aspect of it is that the first design from 1980, which already has a kind of GG-esque shape to it, that design didn't have the double bridge in the lugs. And then the first introduction of an extra bridge in the lugs came in 1981 in what's called the Zog prototype. And Zog was an industrial designer. I forget his first name, but he was an industrial designer in Zurich. And I think he worked with Schmidt and Muller and gave them this design, which was, coming from the 1980, he was trying to add something to it, change it a bit, and also add a bridge. In the actual prototype, the prototypes I've seen, and I own this one in the picture, there is no bridge. But in the drawing, there clearly is a bridge, and there may be prototypes out there that have the bridge. But basically, the bridge was coming back because, or the bridge was coming in because the plastic case needed a bridge or it would be too fragile. And so this is an example of a Zog prototype where the single bridge broke, and that's just an example. This is just a picture from an old auction, but you can see it broke, and that's exactly what anybody could see that would be a problem. Now, in this slide, I start to discuss the question of if Gérald Genta actually designed the case because it was designed and made in 1969, the prototype, or that's how I've dated it in any case from the evidence I've already kind of gone over. And the support, there's a lot of supporting evidence for that. And in the end, I believe that he did, but it's hard to prove because of the nature of the confidentiality of the secrecy around the project and the way that the industry worked in terms of not really crediting designers who were paid for their work outright. So, sorry about that. So here we can see, this is my hands when I took it apart. This is the split screw pins. So they're threaded on each end, they're made out of gold, and they meet in the middle. And because of that, it needed these extra two bridges to support the soft gold. And that coincidentally also happened to be a great design for a plastic case for kind of the inverse reason. In the case of the GG, the gold of the bulk of the case wasn't going to break, but the pins, the split screw bars would have bent. In the case of a plastic case, it would be the opposite. The steel bar wouldn't break, but the bridges themselves or the lugs would. So when somebody was looking through abandoned Omega designs, they saw this design and realized that because it had been an 18 karat gold design that dealt with this problem of soft material, it would be a perfect design for a plastic case. And in particular also a monocoque plastic case, because the Swatch had already been conceived to be a monocoque. There's the battery thing in the back, but the movement on all the quartz swatches was inserted through the front, and the movement itself was actually designed into the case back, into the monocoque case. That was one of the ways that they reduced the number of parts, was by actually riveting onto that inside of the monocoque plastic case the bridges and other parts of the internals of the quartz elements. Okay, so then I had also been reading about Gérald Genta, and that he was known to have always, according to Evelyn, his wife, he always designed cases that could actually be built. Like a lot of designers and architects kind of throw out designs that then the engineers have to figure out how to make them work structurally. And Gérald Genta was known for always taking that into account. And I think this is a case from 1969, that was designed by someone who was thinking about the realities of materials and then actually obviously building the prototype to prove it. And then the other thing is the crab hallmark. I'm not going to read this whole text to you, but basically when I saw this and saw that it was a crab, in the original listing, I couldn't see that. After I purchased it, I could see it was clearly a crab. And I decided that it was probably indicating the monohull or monocoque design, because crabs are the same. Like the Rolex Oyster is a 2-part case, like an oyster shell. And this is a single part case, like a crab shell. Crab shells don't open up the same way oyster shells do. They are monohulls. So I think the crab was a reference to that. And then the other thing is the crab in the stamp has 6 free legs, and then it's 2 what do you call it? Pinchers. So that's a normal crab has 4 of the free legs and 2 pinchers. This only has 3, so that's why I think it's also a reference to the case itself. And I searched high and low for many, many hours for anything else that had this crab hallmark to see if it actually belonged to, a specific case designer or whatever, and it didn't. So I think it was kind of somebody's one-off idea of a stamp just for this case. And then I think I also said in that slide that Gérald Genta was also known to have been inspired by animals and nature, and so that also makes sense. So these 2 slides are kind of boring, but basically I went over different points. I'll do it in the video anyway, so that people don't have to download this PDF to get it. But he was known to have worked on the Seamaster case. There's a link here to an interview with him where he says he worked for Omega on a bunch of things, so many that they probably don't even know everything he worked on. And in 1969, he started his own case manufacturer in Geneva. And it was 12 years before he actually made a watch that came out of that manufacturing. And for those 12 years, 1981, he released his first watch with a movement and everything. So for those first 12 years, he was mostly working on the first watch and making prototype cases in that factory. And that factory happened to have been a place a few blocks away from where I lived for 7 or 8 years when I first moved to Geneva. So the things I'm saying that kind of tied Genta to the possibly being the designer of this is that he would have had a brand new case making facility just that year. And the case has these atypical hallmarks, like just a pantograph of the GG and the crab hallmark, and those were atypical of the business at the time. But they might have been something that somebody who was starting out fresh and was very creative would do, A, to get his initials on the case, and B, to use this crab hallmark as something kind of creative as opposed to the typical hallmark for 750 gold, which would have been the Helvetia head. So it doesn't have the Omega hallmark, so that I don't know if this is correct, but I assume that means that it wasn't made by Omega in-house. And then I also felt like if they did use an outside case maker, that also kind of suggests that it was outside design, because although it doesn't necessarily prove it. And then finally, Gérald Genta could have actually made it in his workshop, even if he didn't design it, if it was a design that Omega gave to him or that was from some other watch designer. But that also seems unlikely to me, because of these other things I've identified, and also just because you would think if he was making his own manufacture, it would be for his own designs. So then I also looked into this. I looked up all the case manufacturers in Switzerland, because they are listed because they have these maker's marks. So the only case manufacturer in Switzerland at that period or ever that I could find that also had the initials GG was Gérald Genta in Le Chaux de Fonds, and they had the initials GG, but and they did make cases. They made them in precious metals. They made short runs and prototypes, and they were liquidated in 2020, just a couple of years ago. So I thought, that could be Gérald Genta, and it could that could be how it ended up at auction. But I couldn't find any evidence that they had done case design work for Omega or even prototypes, but they could have, because they were a big, well-known company for over 100 years. They could have, definitely could have done design work for Omega and production work for Omega. But from what I've read about them, more likely they would have done it based on designs that were given to them, either a Genta design or a internal Omega design. And then the things that mitigated against them being the manufacturer, I thought, was that they did have this Maker's Mark 117, which is like the little anvil stamped with the number 117 in it, and that I would think that they would put that on everything that came out of their manufacturer if they had made it. And the other thing is, after 150 years in the business, or however long it was, I think it'd be surprising if they didn't put a Helvetia hallmark on it, because that was the norm at the time. So that kind of eliminated them, although I think it's still, there's a remote possibility that they were involved. Okay, so then the other thing is this family tree thing is, on the left here we have the ASUAG, which merged with SSIH with the final merger happening in 1983. But at the time that certainly in 1969, these were competing companies. And the merger talks only began in 1980, around the same time that ETA was. ETA started the research for an inexpensive quartz watch in 1979. So the merger talks started in 1980, and at that point, I would think that Nicholas Hayek could be a conduit between the two companies, and the Swatch project was a big deal. And he could already have been creating this cross-communication looking for the case design. So then the case design could be moved over to the ETA ASUAG side of the family tree even before the merger, just through the coordination of that. And then the design being attributed to Marlies Schmidt and Bernard Mueller's, because they were hired to design it. But that doesn't mean, like, I'll go into that in a later slide, but that doesn't mean that they did every aspect of the design, because it was typical to pull together these, different design elements. And a good example of that is like the Bernard Mueller's brother, Jacques, was the designer of the internal part of the case and the electronics. So and that concept is integral to the case too, because, So his brother was also part of the case designer, and that case design element is different than the GG, because the GG wasn't a plastic case for a quartz movement. So all those elements have to come together, and that's one of the reasons why Omega and all these watch companies would have wanted to keep all of their case designs uncredited and flexible and able to be, changed to accommodate whatever was happening, whatever they needed to in terms of putting movements in them, adapting them, changing them, etc. So anyway, that's why I think that the story could be that the 1969 case was used. I think this slide, you're going to have to download the PDF if you want to read it, because it's basically about what I just said. But I'm not going to read it to you, and it's not written to be summarized other than what I just did. This is the listing from Ricardo. This is what I saw when I was deciding about bidding on it. And some people had asked some questions about it, so I've repeated those there. They're in German and French, so good luck with that. But that was what I saw when I was bidding on it. And this is, I guess in retrospect, maybe I could have recognized that as a crab, but I didn't recognize it as a crab at the time. I did recognize that GG though. And then the other thing I didn't mention at the beginning is it says 3 out of 10, and it also has a kind of Roman numeral 2 here. So that to me suggests it was a prototype, only 10 were made, and maybe it was the second of a series of prototypes as the design evolved. back in 1969, 1970, whenever that was. This is the box it came in. One of the things in the notes, in the auction notes, was that this jeweler in Liechtenstein, Huber, had replaced the strap, and it had a Swatch strap on it. So I emailed Huber after I bought it and asked them if they had the old strap or if they had noticed anything about it. And they said it was just an old no-name strap that was falling apart, and they didn't specify if they threw it away or gave it back to the seller, but I haven't been able to track that down as yet. But the new Swatch strap that they put on it fits perfectly. The lug spacing, all that. And the buckle. 18 millimeter wide buckle. So my conclusion from all of that was that the original Swatch design was based on a prototype for the Omega Seamaster Cosmic 2000, and this was kept a secret so as not to conflict with the marketing image of the new beginning for the Swiss watch industry that the Swatch represented to ASUAG and SSIH's employees, shareholders, and customers. I think the design was altered during the technical development process, resulting in a new origin story, but eventually settled back on the Omega design after the ASUAG SSIH merger was certain. Not necessarily after it was legally binding, but after it was certain that that was what was going to happen. And I think Gérald Genta likely designed it and recognized it, as I think if he put all that effort into this gold case, he would have recognized aspects of that design in the Swatch, but he never mentioned it as a result of his professionalism because he understood the terms under which he did the tens of thousands of watch designs, and he's estimated as many as 100,000 that he did over the years. It wasn't something where anybody would go back and cry sour grapes because somebody who they had sold their design to actually used that design. And it was also probably all done confidentially where you were not even allowed to claim it, or that may just be a professional norm at the time, or it might have been written into non-disclosure agreements. That I don't know. It would be interesting to know that. So that's pretty much it. There's an interview linked in here. It's the same one I linked in the other page with Gérald Genta that's brilliant. And he discusses some of that history with Omega and the Seamaster and starting his own manufacturer in 1969. And that's just a wonderful interview to read too if you're interested in all this. So that's that. That's the 1969 prototype for the Omega Seamaster Cosmic 2000, which I think was Gérald Genta's design. If you have any opinion about this, please feel free to say so in the comments or contact me. And if you know people that you think would be interested in the story and the history of this, feel free to send a link to them, and also check out that PDF that's linked in the description here. All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.